we would talk, of course, about the requirements of our star guests, because that was of major importance. And for example, if you get a Gloria Swanson or a Carole Lombard or Fred MacMurray, you have to concentrate on making them as good as their talent would entitle them to be made. And so we would have sort of general agreements about that. And then later, when we had a larger staff, and to us that just meant 4 or 5 writers instead of the 57 they have now, generally you would have Stan and Herb write one sketch. Then if the guest was also funny and creative in his own way, such as Peter Ustinov, for example, who was with us several times, we would confer with him. And in many cases, if we were lucky, he'd say, hey, I already do a bit as a German tank commander or whatever, so you'd just drop his bit like a building block into your show, not have to write much of it. Or you would start with something he could do and build a sketch around that. One of the cutest sketches, for example, involved my playing straight for Peter, who's a wonderfully talented man and very charming. And I was just about to actually travel to Europe that summer. So I said, this is the kind of thing you can expect if you travel across borders in Europe. So at one point we were pretending that I was at the border as we entered Germany, and he gave a very funny performance as the German official inspecting my luggage and so forth. And then later he was the same kind of a fellow, but in this case, as you enter the borders of Italy, and in the third instance, I don't know, the borders of Russia, whatever it was. So we built that sketch around his abilities. In some cases, by we now I'm talking about the writers, we were able to take people who had no history whatever at comedy, except perhaps light drawing room comedies, they used to call it, like a Cary Grant or a Claudette Colbert, and give them broad comedy to do, and they would do it very well. In fact, one of the funniest sketches ever done on television, I can say that because I was not in that sketch. I was just loving it and watching it from the sidelines. Because when you're the host of a show, you can't be in all the sketches, and even if you could, you shouldn't. So the premise in this case was that there are some people who don't appreciate when they see a film, they take a scene and they just say that's good or bad, and they don't appreciate it. It might have taken 57 takes to get that simple 2-minute scene. So we hired Charlton Heston, whose name does not immediately come to mind when you think of great comedy performers, but who is very cute with comedy. We hired him to play a klutzy John Wayne kind of a cowboy star on Alan Ladd, very masculine, but no comedy chops, and show how through his goofing up you might have to do a scene many times. Now that's not a premise that automatically gives rise to laughter. You have to see how we developed it. And it was brilliant. One of the great sketches of all time, I repeat. And he worked with Don Knotts and Dayton Allen and Tom Poston and Louis Nye as imaginary crew members on this movie scene. So it was somehow more fun to take people who, as they say, had never done comedy in their lives and get screams with them. In one instance, our guest was the great film star Greer Garson, that grand lady of the silver screen, very glamorous, very charming. And she and I did the same kind of a sketch 3 times, once as it might be directed by Elia Kazan in sort of a waterfront Marlon Brando approach. Then again, as if it were directed by, I don't know, Alfred Hitchcock, with just 3 different approaches to the same scene. And we did another sketch once we had hired Lily Palmer, the famous film actress. We then had to decide, how are you going to make Lily Palmer funny? Well, we did. And in this case, I wrote the sketch myself. I had noticed that in my capacity as both a moviegoer and a composer, very often the composers, though they may win Academy Awards at the end of the year, when you see the movie, you're not thinking of their music at all. You're thinking of, oh my God, will he get shot, or will the detective get there in time, or whatever. That's what you should be thinking of. But sometimes you're giving the actors credit for what Dmitri Tiomkin or Henry Mancini really did with the music. They establish a mood and they scare you with their music and so forth. So Lily Palmer and I did the same scene, deliberately using meaningless conversational cliches of 2 people who accidentally meet, in this case in Central Park in the early evening. And in the first case, it was deliberately dull. Then we repeated the scene, this time with romantic background music, just violins tearing your heart out. Now it was the same words, but now we seemed like 2 lovers meeting on a spring evening. Then in the third instance, again the same words, this time mysterioso, scary Alfred Hitchcock type music. Now it seemed that she was in danger and that I might have in mind to kill her there in the park before the cops came along. So we were quite good, if I do say so myself, at utilizing star names, but in creative and original ways.